All right. Hey, everyone. And thank you for joining me once again on another episode of the Remarkable Coach podcast. I am your host, Michael Pacheco. And today with me, I have Kelly Campbell. Kelly is a conscious leadership coach to creative and technology agency founders. From firsthand experience, she understands that agency ownership transcends numbers. It is a journey that can be an emotional roller coaster or lead to a spiritual awakening, but usually both. Kelly, welcome to the podcast.
Michael, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to chat today.
You bet. Me too. So I usually like to kind of start out the podcast with having our guests just kind of talk a little bit about themselves and tell us a little bit more about what you do. So if you want to just kind of go from there, and then we'll just kind of dive in and I'll ask questions as we go.
Yeah, that sounds great. I love an organic conversation.
Yeah.
So my journey is that, I owned a digital marketing agency, cause marketing agency to be specific, for about 14 years. And as you said in the beginning, it definitely transcended the numbers, and I learned so much through that process. I ended up selling the company in 2016. Most of the people say, wow, you were able to sell an agency that you had created from scratch. That's amazing. Now you must be sort of in semi-retirement and maybe coaching a few people, and that's it. And the reality was it was very different for me. I sold the agency because it wasn't bringing me joy. It was impacting my marriage. I was really just full of anxiety and stress. And I also, on top of that, even though I loved my team and I loved the clients who we were serving, I loved the impact that we were making in the world, on a very deep personal level, I just felt like I was meant for more, if that makes sense. And I didn't know what that looked like, but I knew that continuing to run the agency was probably not the best fit for me anymore. And so luckily I was able to sell it, and took me a little while to figure out what I was going to do next. Started out consulting, just straight up growth, scalability, profitability, consulting engagements with other agencies. And then that led me to understand that it was actually the deeper understanding of the agency owners about themselves and some of the ways in which they were kind of bringing their past with them, right? Wherever we go, the past follows us. So they were bringing their past and their traumas and all the stuff that we all carry with ourselves, bringing that into their leadership roles. And when I started to unpack that with them, it felt like I was in complete alignment with where I wanted to go with my coaching practice, with my career. And, it's literally been the most rewarding part of this entire journey. And I'm actually writing a book about something similar to that, basically connecting the dots between healing our past, healing our childhood trauma, if you will, and how that leads to becoming a more conscious leader. So lots of good stuff. And obviously I have a podcast as well, which we chatted about before. So yeah, lots of great things that are happening, but it's been a journey.
That's awesome. There's a lot to unpack there. I don't even know.
Yeah, I know. I'm just going to hit you with all of it, and then you can tease out whatever questions you have. I'm happy to answer them.
Where the hell do I begin from all that? The book. Let's start there. I love that you've distilled it down to childhood trauma. I've done a lot of coaching myself, and I couldn't agree with that more. That's great. Tell me about that path. What did that look like to go from owning an agency to writing a book about childhood trauma and unlocking potential or whatever that looks like? Tell me about that path.
Yeah. So I'll try to make it as succinct as possible. After I sold the agency, I was sort of faced with these larger questions. Who was I? What was important to me? What was my purpose? I couldn't answer those questions. And for, a type A CEO her whole life, who was at that point 36, not being able to know all the answers, especially when they were just about myself, was really scary. It was terrifying. And I thought, okay, well, if this is where the questions are, as opposed to avoiding it and as opposed to distracting and numbing from it, I've got to really look at this. And so I know, and I had been in traditional therapy for years before that, but I started kind of unpacking that for myself, really going on that journey of self-awareness, self-development, healing some of those things from childhood that, just kept repeating themselves over and over again, right?
Mm-hmm.
And through that work, I started working with a shadow work coach. I started working with a Buddhist psychology coach who also dabbles in contemplative science as part of her practice, neuroscience.
So during this time, are you just throwing spaghetti at the wall, or are you doing this with intention, or what was the
so
behind that?
that's a good question in terms of like the exact mix of how
why a shadow work coach? Why a Buddhist?
Yeah, I tend to think that things that we need sort of present themselves, and then it's really up to us as to like, do we lean in or is it too much for us, right? And having gone through the traditional therapy path for so long, it was incredibly effective for what I needed it for. But I knew it also wasn't going to get me to the level of breaking through and really like changing all of these behaviors and changing my own mindset and things like that. So I thought, my initial thought was, well, which one am I going to work with? And then I looked at the reality and I was like, well, I could actually afford to work with both of them. So why do I have that self-limiting belief? And for me, the combination, which sounds really disparate and not connected in any way, shape, or form, the combination of those two coaches for me was the game changer. So, and I'm still working with them just because it's great now as a coach to also have those coaches in my life for my own support.
Nice.
Yeah. So that's pretty much the journey of that. And then writing the book, that didn't start out as the book that it's become. I'm about 3/4 of the way finished, about halfway through the book proposal for publishers. So getting really close to the light at the end of the tunnel with that, but it didn't start out as this book.
So you started writing a book and the book changed as it evolved? That's crazy.
So I started writing a book where I was telling the story of other agency owners or people that were, marketing executives or marketing leaders. And I was telling their story. And in there were 8 of us in total. In there was my story, but it was a little sliver. And that was my comfort zone. My comfort zone was to play small and to let everybody else go first. And then if there's time, I could also tell my story. And so the book, I didn't realize it at the time, but the book was sort of a microcosm of that. And I had hired one book consultant who took me down that path for the first year. And then I hired another book consultant after I got stuck. And she read the manuscript and she said, don't delete a word, but kind of throw it out the digital window. And this is not your first book. This is probably your 3rd book. And I was like, okay, I'm listening. And she said, I'm going to ask you a question. I want you to close your eyes. And I want to know what the very first memory is when I ask you this question. And the question was, when was the first moment you remember stepping into a leadership role? Now, having been a young CEO and having played sports all my life, you would think that things like that in that vein would have popped up, but that wasn't what popped up. It was actually a latent traumatic memory of my mother telling my brother and I that my dad was going to be leaving. She didn't know when he was going to be back. She was not able to, she didn't have the tools to like help us through that as kids. I was 9, my brother was 8. And when I saw that she wasn't going to kind of step up and give us the support that we needed in that moment, I turned to my brother and kind of put my arm around him. And I was like, it's going to be okay, bud. And I kind of like showed up, even though I was scared to death and I pushed all my emotions down. That was the memory that came up when Leah asked me that question. And I got done and I said, I don't know where that came from. I haven't thought about sitting in the back seat of that car since I was 9 years old. And she said, congratulations, you just wrote the first chapter of your book.
Nice.
And it was like, wow. So it's been just, unfolding from there. And so, yeah, so hopefully, probably going to be out 2023.
If you'll permit me, I want to tell a very short story and bond with you a little bit. So I've been doing a lot of work myself, working with multiple coaches and coaching groups, men's coaching. And a lot of that work has been around, unbeknownst to me, a lot of that work has been around childhood trauma of my father abandoning me. Before I was born, my parents were never married. Before I was born, my father told my mother, have an abortion or I'm leaving. And I knew about that story. I've known about it for years. And that was just something that was a dark cloud that's been hanging over my head my entire life. And I didn't even know it until I don't remember the exact moment, but I went to like a weekend, a group session for a coach that I'm with back in August, and it was like a 4-day.
This past August.
Mm-hmm. It was a
wow. This is really new for you.
It says super fresh.
Wow.
And I'm 41 years old, and there was just a lot of unpacking during that time, a lot of vulnerability. It was a men's group, so it was me and 11 other dudes, and a lot of just a lot of tears, and it was so powerful. Oh my God. Yeah. Oh my God.
Such a beautiful story and like experience. And I totally appreciate you sharing that with me. Yeah, and there are tears. This is messy, emotional work, right? And that's why a lot of people avoid it.
Yeah.
But the reality is once you actually step into it and you realize, wow, there's some stuff that, you're 41, you didn't realize it until pretty much this year.
Mm-hmm.
Stuff like that. I mean, I've been doing this work for a very long time and stuff like that still comes up for me.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's lifetime work. Yeah. It's not like there's a destination. You don't get to one day and you're like, okay, cool, I'm healed, I'm good to go. It doesn't work like that.
All done.
Right? All done. I think that's called death.
Yeah.
So I think it's just a commitment to like constantly learning, constantly getting curious, asking yourself these questions. Like, why do I get triggered by that? Why am I reactive when so-and-so says this, or, so yeah, it's great work in terms of coaching other people and especially leaders for me to see them have these unlocking moments where they're unpacking their stuff and I'm helping them through that through a series of, questions and just like really exploring through a trauma-informed lens.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. I want to circle back a little bit to your bio. You are a conscious leadership coach to creative and tech agency founders. Tell me about conscious leadership. What does that mean?
So conscious leadership was born out of the conscious capitalism movement, which I'm going to say about a decade ago, John Mackey, who was the CEO of Whole Foods, and Raj Sisodia basically came together and kind of created this model, if you will, where, what if there could be a different way to do business where we put people, planet, and profits all on the same line, pretty much in that order. Right. So yes, we have to be profitable. We're running businesses, not charities. We also need to take the planet and environmental considerations, into consideration. And in order to do that, we need to focus on the people to make sure that the people are supported. And that honestly doesn't matter whether you're in a product-based business or a service-based business, right? So conscious leadership was kind of born out of conscious capitalism. And conscious leadership is all about this idea that we have to be more self-aware. We have to take radical responsibility for how we show up, but then also radical responsibility for our people and the planet. And of course, at the end of this, the lagging indicator is that we will actually be more profitable. And there are there are a handful of studies. This is it's new. It's all within the last decade. So, but there are lots of studies and lots of companies that subscribe to this model and this style of leadership. And, it's just proven. It's just proven because it's the next right thing, right?
Would you consider Costco a part of that?
I don't know if I know enough about the intricacies of the business model to be able to say yes or no.
Yeah.
But, you could use Whole Foods as an example, and there are lots and lots of other examples out there.
Is that pre-Amazon Whole Foods or even post-Amazon as well?
Well, so he came up with this, he and Raj came up with this, I believe it was 2012.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's, and there are also lots and lots of people who have different spin-off groups of that. You've now got people like Diana Chapman and Jim Dethmer, who have created or wrote the book, The 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership. And there's a whole movement around that and what it means to be a leader who is either above the line or below the line, which is really reactivity and self-awareness and, things along those lines. That's a great book if your audience is looking for a place to start. I would recommend 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership for someone who's a little bit more into like an academic read or just like a larger or bigger picture. Becoming a Conscious Leader by Gina Hayden is my Bible. She's writing the foreword to my book. So I'm really excited about that.
That's awesome. Good for you. That's great.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Right on. Does this have anything to do with B corporations? Is there any, crossover there?
So there's no tie-in, but what I would say is from a legality standpoint or a very linear standpoint. But what I would say are the people who would self-assess and become B Corps. It's not. I wouldn't say it's a 1-to-1 ratio, meaning like a causational rate. If you are a B Corp, you're absolutely a conscious leader, but just based on what a B Corp represents and the commitments that those leaders make, you could say that this kind of fits into that realm for sure.
Probably a lot of correlation there. There's probably a lot of overlap in the Venn diagram.
100%.
Yeah. Right on. Yeah. With Costco, I was wondering about that because I know, the Costco's model has been used in a number of business books that are not necessarily on conscious leadership, but I know they put a big focus on employees first, putting employees first. They're not open on holidays. They're never going to be, they close earlier in the evenings on the weekends, that sort of thing. Like they put a lot of stock in their employees. And that seems to trickle down, so to speak, to eventually to profitability, right? It's like you said, the lagging indicator, happy customers, and that becomes happy employees leads to happy customers, leading to profits in theory.
You got it. That's exactly I talk about this cycle of like money follows our values, right? Yeah. So if our values are that we want our employees to feel seen, heard, respected, understood, and we support them in all the ways that we need to, then they become more loyal, more productive. They're better advocates for our brands or our organizations. That makes happier clients or customers, right? Those customers become advocates. They either refer business if it's a service-based business, or they tell other folks about, a particular product. It allows trust to accumulate. You think about the cost just from a business standpoint, the cost to acquire a new customer or a new client, the cost to acquire a new employee. These are exorbitant costs. And if you could reduce attrition on both of those levels, I mean, it just, the wheel keeps going. So it's, the business case is so clear. But I think the thing that's been holding it back from becoming sort of widely adopted or mass adoption is this idea that like, there's a distrust of, what do you mean? Like if I'm not leading in a fearful way, right? A fear-based way, and I'm not forcing my employees to do certain things and holding them accountable in that kind of, more authoritative manner, then they're not going to do what I want them to do. Right. And also, what is this whole tie into the environment? Right. It's kind of like, there's been such an extractive, when it comes to business and especially corporations, we've been so extractive about it, right? So this idea that we could do right by people, our fellow humans, and our planet, and still turn a profit, people scratch their head. They're like, how is it possible? The reality is like, you got to open your eyes wider and realize, the proof is right there, right there.
Nice. I love it. You mentioned that agency ownership transcends the numbers. Can you talk a little bit about that and what that means? I'm curious about what you mean by that myself as an agency owner.
So I think as agency owners, or to be honest, this is applicable to any business. Numbers are just metrics, right? And I think we have historically, probably since the Industrial Revolution, been so enamored with performance and numbers and revenue and profit margin, and we don't kind of look at anything else. We don't look at the health of our organization, right? Raj Sisodia wrote in 2019 a book called The Healing Organization, right? So if we don't look at the health of our organization and whether it's healing, whether it's kind of reparative, then we're really missing the boat. Because if we're only focusing on profit and all of those numbers, we're really just, we're remiss. If we're able to kind of zoom out for a second and think about business is not just about making money. And I know that there will be some people, and there will always be some people who say, yes, it is. I'm like a hardcore capitalist. It's all about making money. I agree with you that money has to be part of it. You know, this is not, I joke around, this is not like we're all holding hands and skipping through the meadows, you know, and singing Kumbaya. I would love that. But the reality is we have bills to pay. We have, you know, shareholders and other stakeholders to, you know, to answer to. So yes, money is important, but it does transcend the numbers, because if you think about the impact that you have as the agency owner in how you show up, how you treat those employees, what you're doing is you're modeling a particular behavior. You're influencing stress levels, anxiety levels, mental health for your employees, right? They're going to then take that home into their own homes, into their communities, right? So it does transcend the numbers. At my former agency, we were very big on giving back. We were a cause marketing agency. So it made sense for us to have a foundation of our own where we would raise money through, you know, digital marketing for local nonprofits, you know, the animal shelter and the soup kitchen around the corner. And then we actually, you know, in addition to raising that money, we volunteered our time. And, you know, that was not only huge team bonding, but look at the actual direct impact in the community. So yeah, I'm really proud about that. And I think that my employees really take that with them as they go into other jobs. And, you know, I think it influences so much more, maybe even how they raise their own kids. So yeah, it absolutely transcends the numbers. I hope that answers your question.
That's great. I love that. What kind of things can an agency owner do to that end, right? To be a conscious leader, to help support their employees in, you know, bigger ways than a paycheck?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a big question.
Sure.
Because there isn't a direct answer to say, do this, and that will make you a conscious leader. Where it starts, and you know, this isn't a cop-out, but this is the true answer. Where it starts is inward. Having the time to pause and start reflecting on how you are actually showing up, asking yourself those questions, right? Like, when this employee says this to me, or this client emails me this, why am I reacting this way? Right? What is it about that? Maybe I should look into that a little bit more. So it's dialing up your curiosity. That is going to lead to way more self-awareness, right? And self-awareness as a practice, because all of this, like leadership style, it's a practice, right? We have to do it every day, just like working out or anything. It's like a muscle you train.
Sure.
So it's first about the questions, the curiosity, getting inquisitive, super self-reflective. You know, and you're getting it from lots of different places, right? This is the interesting thing about this path. You know it better than anyone. You're absorbing from people that you have interactions with, right? Podcasts that you might listen to, books that you're reading, articles, maybe your own therapy sessions, or if you work with a coach. So you kind of get it from all different places, and it starts to change who you are. It starts to change your mindset. It is not fast. This is not overnight. This is like the long haul. So yeah, it's not like, oh, just check these 3 boxes and thumbs up, you're a conscious leader. It's it takes a while.
Is there any tactical advice, or just like, here's like one thing that you can do to, you know, help start the ship moving in that direction?
Yeah, sure. So tactically speaking, you can look at the way that your organization is structured, right? In support of the employees. For example, what is your leave policy, right? Is it for maternity and paternity leave? What kind of flexibility options do you have in place? What kind of additional things that are outside of the normal scope of, you know, healthcare and health insurance and all that? What kind of things are you doing to support those employees to make sure that they've got really great life work integration, right? I've seen agencies do really interesting things, not just agencies, lots of businesses. They might bring in yoga instructors or meditation instructors for like the middle of the workday, right? Even if it's on Zoom, probably especially if it's on Zoom. You can turn your cameras off, but having someone do like a guided meditation at, at lunchtime or whatever, offering people things that are a little bit outside of what the norm is. Mm-hmm. And I also have, this is kind of a slightly shameless plug, but I have another venture that I started earlier this year called Consciousness Leaders. Mm-hmm. And it's a representation agency where we have all those types of experts, people that are coaches, consultants, speakers, workshop facilitators who might bring some of these things into the workplace. So, leadership coaching for sure, but also somatic healing, mindfulness and meditation instructors, anyone who's kind of in the realm of conscious leadership or any of the subtopics or subcategories around that, specifically to help organizations flourish.
Nice. I love that. I love that you mentioned doing like a guided meditation, because we've done that before in our agency, and people love it.
I'm curious, when you start your own coaching sessions, or if you know of other coaches, how many of them start with like a breathing exercise? Super simple, but like just to like reset.
Yeah. Get rid of, whatever your whatever you're coming from, and be like, we're starting coaching now, and kind of, reset.
Totally. Yeah, it's so great to like just reset that nervous system.
It happens all the time.
I've actually seen a couple of clients who started doing that when they have, let's say, like their weekly standing meetings on Mondays, right? Everybody's on Zoom. Okay, guys, let's just go through like a couple of deep breaths together, really slow. Somebody might guide it, somebody might not, but when they all come together, it's amazing to me from their anecdotal evidence and then my firsthand experience with clients when I do that. Mm-hmm. Amazing to me how different we both show up when we both engage in that. Again, super simple.
And it's crazy how even with a distributed team, I have a distributed team, from people here in the Pacific Northwest. We've got some people in the Philippines and Pakistan, all over. And even with a distributed team, doing some simple breathing exercises, a simple meditation, how much kind of synchronicity you can build, and how people come together in the meeting with just their heads in the same place.
Yeah. And my theory about why that is that we could all be coming from different experiences right before hopping on the call, right? Yeah, so we're almost like, to use a little bit more esoteric terminology, we're kind of all vibrating at different frequencies. But when we come together and we have this shared experience, whether we're on camera or not, we're all kind of like really vibrating at that same level. And now we're literally on the same page, right? And so I just feel like it really does level set, and you're able to get much more done, way more innovation, way more collaboration, way more creativity, for sure.
That's awesome. Yeah. And I think when you frame it that way, it's almost more important to do that with a globally distributed team, because I've got people coming in that have just had dinner. Yep. and I've just woken up and had my first sip of coffee, and like different worlds, right?
Yeah, it's a great point.
Yeah. I'll mention something that I do from my team at our weekly stand-ups is we'll open the meeting with everyone going through and talking about one professional win and one personal win. Uh-huh. And that just gets everyone kind of talking about things they're excited about.
Yeah.
Which also helps kind of bring everyone to a space where you want them to be like excited about stuff, right? Because you're going to talk about all the team stuff and what's going on.
Yeah, I love anything where you're kind of bringing the humanity in. Again, you're there to run a business. Everybody knows that there's a job to do. But by the way, we're also human, right? So a lot of people might do, like, if they have an end of week, a Friday check-in or something, they might end that with going around and saying, okay, what's like your top highlight, that you're looking forward to this weekend?
Totally.
So there's a million different ways that you can carve that out. Whatever makes sense for your culture. Your organizational culture makes sense for you.
Yeah. I think one of my big wins every week is that I have, I talk to my employees and they all say basically like, Boxer, it feels like family. And it's awesome. Like, that's the best, like the best you can hope for. Right. Because then people, they'll go down on the sword for you because
Yeah.
it's family and they love it.
So long as it doesn't feel like the dysfunctional family,
Of course.
then I'm on board with that. But yeah,
Totally.
and also like that's an interesting point. Having it feel like family. Sometimes you could have trouble maintaining boundaries, right? Because you may have those relationships that are a little bit tighter than a traditional professional relationship. So I think, as I said, as long as you're kind of like yes, this feels like family in all the good kind of heart-centered ways. I really enjoy the people that I'm working with. That's great. But making sure that like, yeah, I love you, man. And I'm done with work at 6. Like, don't text me on a Friday at 8:00.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah. That's 100% spot on. Totally. I think it's important for me, it's important that it feels like family, that those boundaries exist. Yeah. I don't know where I was going with that. I agree with you. That's where I was going with it.
I think, just to kind of stick with the boundaries for 1 second, I think that especially in the agency world or any kind of service-based organization, it's really, really hard to maintain those boundaries and to speak up when those boundaries are starting to get crossed, because if you do have mostly positive relationships, just like it's hard to tell your best friend that they did something that hurt you. Right. In the same vein, it's really hard to say, hey, like I noticed that you did this thing, but, I kind of said that this way works better for me. Like if email is my main source, I'm just making something up, but like email is my main source of communication. We kind of use that and maybe like an instant messenger tool. But I noticed like 6 times this week, you texted me about work stuff. Like, not cool. That's like that. So having those uncomfortable conversations.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty important as well to maintain those boundaries.
Yeah. And I think, for us, that's definitely, those are within our, company values. We say calling it out, right? The being able to call someone out on their successes and their failures. If you see that someone's not stepping to the line, be able to call it out. And I think that would extend to, personal boundaries as well. And we don't, at Boxer, it's a pretty flat hierarchy. There's no one's really in charge of anyone else. I kind of will make the final decisions, but I'm going to my employees as kind of like a board of directors, basically like, you guys are the smart ones, give me all the information and I'll help guide us. But I think, this is good stuff.
I love conversations like this. It's my absolute favorite.
Yeah. Tell me about how owning an agency can lead to a spiritual awakening. I know you shared your story with us, which was amazing, but how does that apply to anyone that owns an agency?
Yeah, so I can't say the blanket statement that owning an agency will directly correlate to a spiritual awakening, or else everybody will just start agencies. But what I would say, from my experience as a coach and a consultant working with other agencies, in addition to my own lived experience with that, is that most of us who start agencies, we start them because we are practitioners first. And we think, oh man, I could do this myself. I don't have to work for someone else. And we realized pretty quickly that the thing that we were really passionate about, why we started the agency, that quickly diminishes because we get into managerial roles. We're managing a whole bunch of people where we may not have had experience with that before. We are way in the weeds because we tend to bottleneck because we don't, right out of the gate, you're not going to trust everybody on your team and you're not going to delegate. Like that's a pretty common one.
Yeah.
So the way that it kind of leads to this, maybe I won't even say spiritual awakening, because that could be, provocative language for some people. I don't mean anything religious by it. What I mean is that you come to a place where you're like, man, I can't keep going like this. Something has to change because at the core, like my soul is not happy. And this isn't feeding my soul anymore. So what do I need to do? And I think it's kind of that moment where most agency owners, there's a reason why all coaches that serve agency owners or any business leaders, there's a reason why we are in high demand right now. And it's because, leaders of organizations tend to burn the candle at both ends.
Mm-hmm.
It's not sustainable. So as you're getting to the burnout point, I think you just, at some point you hit like a rock bottom,
It's a come to Jesus moment.
It's a come to Jesus moment. You might be finding that you're working so many hours that you're not spending time with like your spouse or your kids. Mm-hmm. It might be that you realize that, hey man, I didn't realize, but I'm like drinking every single night. Mm-hmm. Right. There are so many ways that it kind of manifests until it just hits you in the face one day. And that's kind of what it was for me. Okay. And I think that is a very, very common experience, unfortunately, for a lot of entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
And so it leads to that kind of awakening moment, because you're like, okay, I am committed now to making some change. I cannot keep going like this. And that's the point where you either grab the book or you listen to a podcast or you call the coach or the therapist or whatever it is that you do. He finds their own path. But that to me is sort of how a lot of agency owners get there, because they create that for themselves. Mm-hmm. They're not doing anything wrong. It's just, if you don't know what you don't know, keep doing the same thing that you think is the right way to go about scaling a business or growing it or running it. And that's okay. You don't have to know all the answers. That's why coaches like us exist.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. I love that. Tell us about your ideal client. What is your ideal client? Who is that?
So again, I work exclusively with, I hate the words marketing and advertising. So just that out there. I say that I work with creative, media, and technology agency owners, just because that everybody kind of fits into that. So it could be a branding firm, an experiential agency, website design, development, strategy, you name it. Mm-hmm. So they are owning, operating, or leading in some way. So they're either the actual founder or on the leadership team.
What about size?
Size doesn't really matter to me so much. I will say that I don't tend to work with any agencies that are over about 75 employees. Mm-hmm. Because at that point, it's a whole different animal. Yep. And I've learned that from experience working with a couple that were in like the 200 range. I'm like, no, I think like between a handful and 75 is kind of like a nice, and I have very few that are kind of at that 65, 75. Most of mine are in 5 and 30 employees.
Okay. Right on.
And they are, my main criteria is, are you self-aware enough to realize that you're probably the one holding the business back? Mm-hmm. If you're already at the point where you're self-aware, you're going to be way more open to sort of my style, which is a hybrid approach between coaching, like traditional, not traditional, but like trauma-informed coaching, mm-hmm. and a separate session where I'm consulting, I'm advising, I'm guiding, I'm mentoring, right? I keep those two separated because otherwise it gets a little muddy as to like how I'm supposed to show up.
100%.
And so that feels really good to me. So yeah, that's pretty much the only criteria.
Let's expand on that a little bit. If you could tell us a little bit more about what does a typical engagement look like with you?
Yeah, so I have one for 2022. I've got one service, and I'm streamlining. Obviously, there's lots of things pulling out my time, so I'm just trying to be more strategic about that. So the one service is literally a hybrid of conscious leadership and agency growth coaching / consulting. Again, you get 1 hour of coaching from a trauma-informed lens. So I'm now, as of February, I will be a certified trauma-informed leadership coach. Mm-hmm. So that's the one session per month for 1 hour. And then the second session per month is the consulting, where I'm wearing the consulting hat. And in addition to that, we kind of collaborate asynchronously through Google Drive. And I also offer like consultative support throughout the month. So, hey, Kelly, can you look at this proposal? We've got to, walk a client through it in 2 days. Sure, send it over. I'll take a look at that. Mm-hmm. There's an employee who I'm having an issue with. Can we hop on the phone for 5 minutes? Like, mm-hmm. I need to calm down. I need to I'm a little below the line right now. So I need to just get in the right headspace. So yeah, I would say that my clients typically contact me phone, text, or email about 3 to 5 times per month, in addition to those coaching sessions and the collaborative support. So I'm very hands-on with my clients, and I work with 10 clients at a time. So at this point, I've got kind of a waiting list, but always looking for those awesome clients to work with.
Nice. What does the contract look like? Is that just month to month retainer, or do you like a 6-month package? Or
no, I'm not into contracts that way. So I've got a service agreement. Anything that's like a separate project that has an actual deliverable to it, that would be a separate SOW.
Yeah.
But everything is just, basically month to month, until we both determine that, they're either at the point where they're self-sufficient, ready to go. And of course they could come back and ask me any questions. I'm not going anywhere. But no, I'm not a fan of locking people into coaching contracts in that way. If it's not working, it's not working, but sure. I actually haven't experienced that yet in the last 5 years.
Nice. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Kelly, I think that's about it for me. Is there anything that I didn't hit upon that you want to talk about? Do you have anything, a lead magnet or anything to offer our listeners, or anything?
I'm kind of that atraditional person. I don't do like online courses. I know this is like anti coach business model, but
everybody that's listening, we have a digital marketer. We have a digital marketer here who does not have a course to offer. No lead magnet, nothing.
Nope.
You're killing me, Kelly.
Nope. It's like, for me, it's really all about like authenticity, and I hear all the benefits to it and I understand them. At my former agency, we used to build things like that all the time, but for me, it doesn't feel right, and that's okay. So yeah, the only thing that I would say is just, I like to leave people with kind of like a book recommendation or a podcast or something like that. So if you're interested in more of like, what the heck is conscious capitalism? I've never heard of it. I would definitely check out Raj Sisodia's podcast with Tim Henry. I think it's just called Conscious Capitalism. That's on Spotify and all sorts of stuff. So you can Google that. And then if you're interested a little bit in kind of more of the healing the past stuff, and you want to just kind of read that, and maybe you're not ready to let anybody know that you're kind of thinking about those things, Dr. Nicole LaPera wrote a book last year called How to Do the Work, which is a great title. So it's really about, just kind of like revisiting, healing the past, kind of confronting it, healing it, and just living a life that you are excited to live.
Do that, people. Check out that book. I'm telling you.
Have you read it?
I have not read it, but I just know the power of digging up old stuff and that you don't even know is there.
Yeah. Well, I love this title so much because she nailed it. I mean, it's the number one question that I get asked, like, how do you do the work? And the reality is, like, there is no one particular prescriptive path. You literally encounter all of these things as you're doing the work. And people are like, but it's so amorphous. I don't understand. So now my go-to is like, okay, here's a book literally called How to Do the Work.
And it's the book itself is tactical.
I'm going to make you read it.
Okay.
And then we'll have a good conversation about whether you think it's tactical.
I'm going to buy that book
as
soon as we're done here. And then I'm going to have you back on the podcast to talk about it.
Awesome. Oh my God. I would love that conversation. It's such a great book. I think you're really going to like it.
Nice. Yeah. I'm excited.
I have no tie to her, but I think she's doing a great job. And if you are interested in getting more content like that, on Instagram, she is at The Holistic Psychologist. So really, really great content. She puts out a lot of good stuff.
Awesome. That's great. Kelly Campbell, thank you so much for joining us on the Remarkable Coach podcast. You are a remarkable coach.
Michael, it has been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks. And thank you guys for watching and or listening. We will see you again next time. Cheers.